Iwao Hakamada spent 46 years in prison, 34 of them in solitary confinement on death row. In 2014, Khakamada was found not guilty and released. A monstrous miscarriage of justice has resulted in an unfortunate Japanese man spending most of his life behind bars. When the 78-year-old Iwao was finally released, his mental health began to deteriorate. Still would. 34 years of living in absolute isolation, without communication with the outside world, without information about your own fate, every day expecting that today they will come for you and take you to execution. The Japanese suicide bomber surpassed the Count of Monte Cristo. Iwao Hakamada spent almost half a century behind bars awaiting the death penalty. In Japan, he has become a symbol of the brutality of the police and judicial system, and in 2011 he was listed in the Guinness Book of Records as the longest awaiting capital punishment. More than 50 years ago, Iwao Hakamada was a professional boxer, very successful in his country, but his life changed overnight. Khakamada was sentenced to death for the murder, which was committed on June 30, 1966. Then the head of the Japanese company for the production of bean paste was found dead in his own house. The offender also killed the businessman's wife and 2 children, after which he set fire to the premises. The main suspect was an employee of the company, Iwao Hakamada. A shirt was found at the factory, spattered with the blood of the murdered man. The criminal hid it in a vat of bean paste. According to the investigation, it belonged to Khakamada, and it was she who became the main evidence in this case. In September 1968, the Shizuoka District Court sentenced Khakamada to death by hanging. He was convicted on the basis of a confession made under repeated torture, using evidence that the court found to be fabricated. The prisoner later told his family and lawyers that he was interrogated for 23 days. No defender was provided to him then. During interrogations, he was beaten, not given water and not taken to the toilet, demanding to sign a confession. For the next few decades, Khakamada tried to get his case reviewed. But in 1980, the country's Supreme Court upheld the legality of the verdict. 3 years later, Khakamada wrote to his son, "I will prove to you that your father did not kill anyone. The police know this better than anyone, and so do the judges who handled the case. I will break this iron chain and return to you." Khakamada was also awaited by his older sister, Pictured, who sought his release. Hideko Khakamada fought for the release of her unjustly convicted brother for 46 years. All these years, she did not lose hope for the release of Iwao and 3 times forced the lawyers to file an appeal to appeal the verdict. All this time, Iwao Hakamada was on death row. It is there that the criminals alone await the execution of the sentence. It is difficult to imagine what happened to Iwao when he realized that they were about to come for him and hang him. He's been waiting for this for 46 years. Later, prolonged solitary confinement damaged the prisoner's sanity. He began to express his thoughts incoherently and refused to meet with his sister and other family members. 44 years after Iwao's imprisonment, his sister Hideko secured a DNA test. The blood samples on the clothes found did not match the convict's blood. The case was again sent for review, and only 2 years later, in March 2014, Iwao was released from prison. In Japan, those sentenced to death are kept in complete isolation from the outside world, which, in addition to solitary confinement, also implies limited contact with relatives. Khakamada lived in such conditions not just for several years, but for several decades. When he left the prison under the bright flashes of cameras and the glow of searchlights, the media saw not a jubilant freed man, but a slightly stooped elderly man without any expression on his face. Then the journalists vied with each other to ask what Iwao would like to eat now. In the end, one of the operators pulled the rest, "Leave him. Don't you see, he's forgotten what it means to live a normal life." Then Iwao looked up and said, "I want beer and cake." Human rights activists have criticized Japan's punishment system, which includes the death penalty. Prisoners are not told when the sentence will be carried out, and this is too cruel and painful. Mental anguish because a person believes that every day is his last day of life is terrible, but the Japanese justice system sees fit to keep sentenced prisoners in the most punitive regime of ignorance, isolation, and silence imaginable. Iwao Hakamada himself with difficulty returned to normal life. It took superhuman effort and the patience of a sister for her brother to come out of a state of apathy and begin to smile.